Hello, fine people of YouTube. I wanted to speak about something for a second that has been on my mind for a while, and it was brought to my attention again today because I saw a video of Ben Shapiro reviewing the most recent episode of The Last of Us. I do have spoilers for this episode in this video, but I also have to say that I have not personally seen The Last of Us. I have seen content discussing it, and I've seen some people review it, so that is the extent of my knowledge. I also have a very limited knowledge of the game series, which I never played. So of course I'm the perfect person to talk about this, right? It's not really about The Last of Us. This is about how speakers, reviewers, commentators in the conservative media tend to talk about things, pieces of entertainment, that feature minority groups. Now, we all know that media tends to have all different kinds of people in it, and we also know that media can be good or bad. That's always been the case. That's never been different. But I find it strange that a lot of conservative media is, in my opinion, unhealthily fixated on episodes which feature gay people, black people, trans people in leading roles, and how those commentators tend to apply standards of criticism which don't seem to apply to other episodes in the same series even. This episode of The Last of Us very heavily featured a gay couple. And they are a prepping household, and things happen where they die by the end of the episode, and the main characters get something from their property, essentially, if my understanding is correct. Now, I have heard almost everyone say that these characters were very well done, and that the story was not only just groundbreaking, because I know sometimes we get hung up in disagreements about whether something being groundbreaking automatically means that it's good, but we don't even really need to talk about that because most people said that this episode was very good. Regardless of how you feel about gay people simply existing on television alongside straight people, people have been saying that this episode is very good. However, Ben Shapiro said that his main issue with this episode is that it veers off from the trajectory of the first two episodes, which were very strong. Episode 1 and Episode 2, they were both really strong. It's a zombie show. It was a show... They were episodes that feature zombies heavily, that main story. But then Episode 3 came along, according to Ben Shapiro, and messed that up because the majority of the episode is spent on quote-unquote two gay dudes. And that this episode has nothing to do with zombies. Well, what immediately sticks out to me about this is that it'd be really strange to do an episode about preppers if there wasn't some sort of global crisis going on. I mean, you could have an episode focused on a couple, where one of them's a prepper, but I don't think that would be necessarily relevant unless something bad was happening. So, right off the bat, saying that this has nothing to do with the zombie crisis, and that it could have been a standalone thing is odd by itself. The amount of contempt I can see when Ben Shapiro discusses this gay couple is not something I would expect from someone who is reviewing this episode without some sort of major bias. Because I think what most people would have said, had they had a problem with this episode, is that, yes, these characters were very well done, this story was very well done, but I would have preferred if these characters were more important to the main story, and they had more interactions with the main characters before they essentially just died and left materials for them. I wish their story had been woven more into the main story and didn't just reinforce this bury your gays trope. I think if this had been a straight couple, that might have been something like what Ben Shapiro would have said. But because this is a gay couple, these two gay dudes have nothing to do with the story. Why do there need to be two gay dudes? It has nothing to do with anything. Seems a little silly to be talking about that with that much disregard. Now, I am not saying that anytime someone who's conservative even has an issue with an episode of television that heavily features a character who represents some sort of minority. I'm not saying anytime a conservative has an issue with that episode that they're doing it just because there's a person representing a minority in that episode. Of course not. There are all kinds of pieces of media that have come out that have been good on representation, not so good on story. I think most people are aware of that. What I am saying is that when you apply that double standard that you don't seem to apply to other things, there's got to be another issue there. And for Ben Shapiro, I'm sorry, that issue is that Ben Shapiro is a very religious person, and his religion has an issue with gay people in happy relationships basically even just existing. But most people know that you just can't come out there and say, I don't want to see gay people in this episode. Or if it's something different, I don't want to see black people in my episode. I don't want to see trans people in my episode. So they have to find some tangential way to criticize it. Oh no, I don't have an issue with gay people. I just wish that the episode was more focused on family values. I don't have an issue with trans people. I just wish it weren't so political. Of course I don't have a problem with that black person being in that starring role. I just wish they had cast the best person for the role and not thought about race so much. And sooner or later you start to realize that these criticisms sound like a broken record. You hear the same thing and you almost expect it, no matter what it is. I'll ask you this. When's the last time you heard a commentator like Ben Shapiro say something along the lines of, you know, when I saw that this movie very heavily featured trans people in the leading role, I was afraid that it was going to be so heavily focused on politics. But actually, this is a very good movie, and I think they did a good job with those characters, regardless of their gender identity or anything like that. It was just a good movie, even if trans people don't usually represent my own ideology. When's the last time you heard someone like Ben Shapiro say that? Commentators in general are good, in my book, if they can occasionally admit when they got something wrong. Because if you don't admit when you got something wrong, that tells me one of two things. Number one, you never get anything wrong. Or number two, you're afraid of the consequences of people realizing that maybe you're not as confident as you look, or that you think you are. And since I highly doubt that anyone is perfect, I think it's probably the second one in these cases. No one should ever be so ingrained in their political beliefs that they can't occasionally say, you know what, I was wrong about that. I've watched conservative comedians that I thought were going to go out there and make a bunch of jokes that I would just not find funny, not vibe with, but occasionally they say something that is so unexpected that I have to laugh. I say, you know what, I've got to give that joke to you, that was pretty funny. Conservatives make media, including Fox News, the Daily Wire, that I typically disagree with, but sometimes they say something, and I go, you know what? 95% of the time I disagree with these people, but I gotta give them that point. That was a good point. That's what a fair person does. But when I see Ben Shapiro, no matter what it is, if there is heavily featured a black person, or a trans person, or a gay person, in this side of 2020, he will almost always say, there's an issue with it, but not that issue. Definitely not that issue. That's not the main thing. Of course, like I said, Ben Shapiro talks about this with a high degree of contempt, so maybe he would say that that's his issue. I don't know. For the record, by the way, I have a high degree of evidence that Ben Shapiro is transphobic and homophobic. I can't say I have a high degree of evidence that Ben Shapiro is racist, but he definitely toes the line on some issues by speaking about race in these sort of coded terms. I don't know if he's doing that because that's the buzzword or because he's trying to get around things that he actually thinks. But I will say, nowadays, I don't think most conservatives are racist in the way that people often say that they are. But it still comes out in some ways, especially violence by police, and how a lot of conservatives just tend to refuse to accept that there was wrongdoing that could have been racially motivated. Ben Shapiro is one of those people. He'll almost always discount racism as a source of the problem. So maybe in that case, he has a just world bias where he doesn't want to see race as a problem and he wants to think race is solved. So in that way, Ben Shapiro says racist things, but not in the same way that he talks about gay people or trans people. But in my opinion, that doesn't make what he says about those groups any better. It really doesn't. This is just sad. Anyway, did you see these episodes of The Last of Us? Did you see Ben Shapiro's take on those episodes? Whatever your perspective is, please leave something in the comments. I will try my best to respond. More than likely, there aren't going to be many comments, so I'll probably respond to all of them. Anyway, I'll talk to you guys later. Thank you very much for listening. Goodbye.